A.Y. Oza.
Yes, sir.
Welcome to my podcast studio. You are playing the role of Arjuna
Yes.
in Mahabharata plays,
Yes.
which I did not get in my last podcast with Kumar Abhinav, who plays Bhishma.
Mm-hmm.
I think I always called it, and I was trying to get it with him here, the pronunciation, but I finally got it. Mahabharata, basically.
Mahabharata.
Yeah. So you're in the cast. Today I wanted to talk. So I want to do a little bit of an overview of the story for people who didn't watch the first one, but very brief, because I want to focus with you on talking about the character of Arjuna, some background, maybe a little bit of Bhima, the kind of characterological understanding, the meaning behind them, their influence. I'm also very interested in the kind of influence they had on you as an individual, because you grew up with these stories, and their kind of overall meaning and things like that, and just kind of go into stories and maybe any comparisons with Western literature, which we've already kind of offline talked about. So I'd love to.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. No, I love that. I'll turn this up just a bit, but
Delighted.
So first off, let's give the audience an overview. We're doing Mahabharata Tales for Austin Shakespeare at the Long Center. We're recording this on, the 7th?
Yeah.
So today's the 7th. We're recording this now so a week from today, the 14th, we are having our first preview performance, and then we are, going 2 weekends, full weekends in.
Well, a week from today, we open our previews. Previews on the Thursday, right?
Okay.
If not.
We'll check on that for you. I'm pretty sure. Maybe
opening night is the 14th.
One of us is wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know which one. It might be me.
Yeah.
I thought
we
Friday
open
was,
on Valentine's Day.
Yeah, which is
14th. So that's Friday, and then
I thought that
Thursdays
was the
are
preview. Okay, well, whatever.
Thursday.
Oh my
Thursday.
gosh, are you serious?
But previews sold out. So
is it really?
We've got a wait list for previews. So it's sold out. And there's some deals. We'll be getting the new links up on social media, but we've got some specials running.
Yeah.
So get your tickets.
Yeah. So only 2 weekends. Now, if you're watching this before, hopefully this encourages you to buy. If you're watching it after the play, I hope you will learn something and go check out the Mahabharata, because I'm learning a lot. I mean, this is really fascinating. I've studied Greek mythology. I've written my own translation of the Iliad. I really am interested in mythology, and particularly I'm very interested in, world stories and literature and art, and how they influence individual societies and us today.
Yeah.
I think, for instance, I have a theory that we're all romanticists today, whether we realize it or not. The English romantics in the 18th century and the German romanticists, they kind of shaped the world culturally in a way that's still prevalent to us today. Yeah. And, I think in learning about Mahabharata, and there's some other classical Indian stories, I've just, I'm really new. When I mean new, I mean like a couple weeks.
Yeah.
I heard of the Bhagavad Gita before, but I hadn't really read about it. I've known that it's very influential. I think Walden took it to Walden's Pond, and it's the philosophy has definitely been the most influential thing. Yeah. But it's in the West. I think Aldous Huxley did a version of it or something. But in India and in the certain areas of the world, Mahabharata is extremely influential. Yeah. And, and as that culture grows now, I think in our modern world, it's growing and expanding. I think that's becoming more, it'll become more relevant, more, part of the story that's happening. So I'm just very interested in that whole idea, not just of Mahabharata, but just broader literary stories and how they shape individuals and cultures.
Kudos and thank you to you, man, for at least, bringing it on your platform. That's really cool. And for you and all other members of the cast, for a couple of weeks to become such a far way. And it's given me, I did grow up with the story, like you said, but it's given me such a renewed take on it.
Yeah, a different interpretation.
Yeah, it's not just I'm a beginner's mind acting it, but it's coming at it from all of these different perspectives. Everyone's bringing their own unique perspective to it.
Yeah.
Outside of all of this cultural and, propaganda, a lot of it is some kind of old thinking,
What do you mean? For
all of the things that come along with the story.
Oh,
because it has such a religious significance, such a cultural significance.
Yeah.
I mean, it is our epic.
There's some outdated
I imagine,
things or something that aren't.
If you were Greek, you would have such a pride also in those. So it's one of those.
That's interesting. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's one of those things that we grow up with. So to be working with folks that are coming from an outside perspective, it gives such like a renewed, understanding. It certainly it gives you such room for thought and growth, which is such a blessing, because this is such a philosophical epic poem.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's give a quick overview of it, like just of the story, particularly the facets of what we are covering.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in more like an overview that's longer and more in depth, I think I did one with Kumar Abhinav, who's playing Bhishma, but I wanted to get into the individual characters with you a little bit more.
Absolutely.
But I do want to give people an overview just quickly. So do you want to help us with a quick overview of the story? We don't have to go into every plot point in our story, but
keep it succinct.
Yeah, it starts with the poet Vyasa, and he's kind of talking to a young girl, and then they're telling the story of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, right?
Yeah.
So what's going on in that part, and particularly with us, and what does the audience need to know going into this?
So this is like the story of a particular dynasty, the Kuru dynasty, and these characters that are these central characters you mentioned, Bhishma, they're all members of this Kuru dynasty, and it's a story about how
they're both Kurus.
They're both Kurus, yeah. They're both part of the Kuru dynasty. The Kuru dynasty, so it goes all the way.
Pandava is part. Because they're brothers, I know.
Yeah, Pandava just means sons of Pandu.
Yeah, sons of Pandu.
Yeah,
but they're also Kurus.
Mm-hmm. And
this is part of the confusing things.
Yeah, but they're called Kauravas because at the time. So let me just finish the overview. Yeah. So it's just this is like a very complicated thing. So the Kuru dynasty is really what we're like focused on. You have some characters that are not in that dynasty, like Krishna. Krishna is on the Yadu dynasty from a different area.
And he's a character that we're going to see.
He's a character we're going to see. He's the first cousin of the Pandavas. Yeah. So Kunti, the Pandavas' mother.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, the Pandavas' mother, her brother. Is
I know Kunti.
Is a guy named Vasudev, and he was a king in the Yadu dynasty, and his son is Krishna.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, just like Pandu was a king, and then he had to abdicate because he had this curse.
Yes.
And so that it really is that it's the Kuru dynasty. It's the various decisions and vows and mistakes of the ancestors and how that plays out. In the Great Civil Wars, because there are these two brothers. One is Pandu the Pale, when we think that it's probably something like tuberculosis or some sort of something like hepatitis, something that hit his liver and made him this jaundice kind of color. But he was also kind of sickly. And remember, these were all like royal folks.
Yes.
So they did things to maintain a royal blood. You know what I mean? So.
Just watch Gladiator.
Yeah, and so the story is that he had a curse, and so because of the curse, he had to go and stay focused and control his desires, because if he entered into some sort of sexual relationship with his wife, the curse would take hold and he would die. So he took his family. He was king. He took his kids and his wives, and they left. And then his blind brother, who was older, then became king. But what's important here is
that's
Dhritarashtra, yeah. So Dhritarashtra is the older brother, but he was blind.
Yeah.
And so Bhishma, who is at the time of the story, the eldest Kuru, we call him Kuru Shresht. Shresht means the eldest.
Okay.
I think that what we could call it is, the grand sire. But he's the eldest relative of all these folks. And so that guy, he's involved in a lot of these stories. He decided that, it's better that the blind man cannot be king. That's relevant in our play. So that's sort of the fodder for these two cousins fighting, because Yudhishthir is the son of the abdicated king,
Pandu.
Pandu, the younger brother of the current king.
Okay.
And then Duryodhana is the slightly younger cousin of Yudhishthir.
Okay.
And so there's the rights to the throne or not, and this and that. And
now some of that is not like we're not getting into the nitty gritty in our play. You could see that there's an obvious conflict between the two, and that's really stressed. But the epic poem gets into the more nitty gritty, and you get a lot more information, I'm sure, about.
And the fodder of how this, I mean, it's a beautiful story of how this sort of civil war takes root, and how the adults in the children's lives can corrupt it. Because this, one of the characters that we have is Shakuni. Shakuni is the king of Gandhar, present-day Kandahar. That whole giant landmass.
Is that what Gandhari comes from?
Yeah, that whole giant landmass was what we call Bharat. Yeah. And Bharat was a king, Bharat, who unified all these kingdoms. He was in the same dynasty. So most people start this Mahabharata story, they go back to Bharat. Because Bharat was a king in this same dynasty, Kuru dynasty, but many, many generations before Shantanu. So before Bhishma's father.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Right? And this guy was a great unifier. He unified all these kingdoms from all the way from Bengal on one side, then all the way to Afghanistan on the other side, modern day. Mm-hmm. And that whole thing was Bharat.
So this is like Priya.
This is Priya. But that
from
guy...
From Troy and the...
Exactly. And that guy decided his birth son wasn't worthy. So he was such a noble man and such a noble king that he said, all right, my own son is not worthy, and I am going to pick someone else who's outside of the caste system. That also comes into play there.
Sure.
And so that decision sort of set in balance all of these, or set in motion all of these unbalanced things. And then Bhishma came, who abdicated because he wanted, for a reason that we'll find in the play, but he took this great vow so that his father can have offspring with another person. And then that person died. And so they had to bring Vyasa in, who is related halfway.
Wait, that person died as in, so let me just get this straight, because for my own remembrance. So Bhishma, I know he abdicates, or he says he abdicates, he says he won't have children.
Bhishma's half-brother.
Okay, died. Bhishma's half-brother dies.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So he allows his father to, or doesn't allow, he encourages his father, because I remember we have a little scene of this.
Yeah, so I can go back there. So
this is the beginning almost of our.
So the eldest in this Kuru dynasty, we just take a snapshot of what this Kuru dynasty is. The story extends on both sides, but for our purposes, it starts with this guy Shantanu, who's a king.
Yep.
In the Kuru dynasty, in the kingdom of Hastinapur is the name of it. And he has a son with the goddess Ganga, with a goddess, which is important. And that son should be by all rights king, but his father falls in love with another woman. Mm-hmm. And in order to make that marriage work, he said, I will never take children, I won't produce an heir, and I will only serve the kingdom as the sire. I will never take the kingdom.
That's Bhishma.
That was his vow. And he did that so that the second wife of Shantanu, Satyavati, who was the fisherman's daughter, they could have offspring, and those offspring would have right to the throne.
Yes.
Now those offspring, one was a woman, and we have a patrilineal society back then, Chitranga, and she was there. And then Vichitravir was his half-brother.
Who's
Bhishma's half-brother. Yeah, so that was the offspring of the son of Shantanu and Satyavati.
Okay, yeah.
He was sickly.
I see.
Born sickly, he was sickly.
Wait, is this Pandu?
This is Vichitravir.
Oh, Vichitravir.
Yeah.
So this is not in our story, though.
This isn't our story.
We have a Vichitravir?
He dies, and because he dies.
Yes, okay.
Satyavati's other son, out of wedlock, she had another son.
Okay.
That son comes and produces Pandu and Dhritarashtra.
Yeah.
But because this guy's an ascetic and he's covered with mud and he's living in the mountains and meditating, he's not he's in a loincloth. I mean, he's not a prince by any means. And these three princesses from Kashi, two princesses from Kashi, they weren't.
Oh, this is Ambilika, and
so this is Ambika and Ambilika.
Ambilika.
Yeah.
And then there's Amba.
Yeah, and Amba is another character that left.
Okay, now so again, like you're saying, there's these snapshots we have to set up the overall dynastic story before we get into our tale, which is mostly about the Kauravas and so that's interesting, because I actually don't think I had all the details of what, because like a snapshot, like is a real snapshot. Like it's like a couple lines for this, a couple lines for that, and there's like little movements, and it's a really complex, interesting story. I really hope everyone goes to see it. Yeah, because like I know what he's talking about because I've seen it. And so it's I think our play is a really good starting point for learning more about the Mahabharata and exploring it more.
The main conflict I think that's relevant to our story is really between these two cousins. Yeah. And how their rivalry was born and how it was fighting. And relevant to our story is exploring gambling addiction and violence but there's this rivalry that goes all the way back. We can even dive into deeper if we want to talk about the characters.
I do want to talk about the characters and the deeper meaning you might think of.
Yeah. But it culminates in this giant war. Yeah. And then the war ends and as many wars do, there's devastation. Sure. But in devastation,
especially it's peace. Like a civil war.
It's a civil war.
It's a kind of cil war because it's over one kingdom essentially. And it's who's going to rule it.
And it devastates the entire dynasty. There's only one surviving ancestor.
So, wait.
And that's Arjun's son is the only ancestor that survived. Arjun's grandson. Arjun Abhimanyu's son.
Okay. I was like, I didn't want to spoil too much, but we could talk about it. It's for me, like if these things are spoiled, it's okay because the drama's the acting, the performances. And like I like to go into these with some, even if
he's not actually embodied. There's no baby on stage. There's no, we don't have any baby actors. But but the idea is that the Civil War, some of the themes that are there, that the Civil War will annihilate a family.
Well, it's so, like I said, so reminiscent of Western, like Greek mythology and so much, because it really reminds me not just of Troy, but of like Thebes. Yeah. So Thebes is often portrayed as this, it's kind of like a mythological, but possibly historical city. And, you see it playing out. I mean, this is Oedipus is the leader of this, and he's the king at one point. And it often is playing out these stories about stasis and lack of and antistasis, or I think is how the Greeks might have put it, which is like, order and chaos in a city. And my understanding is Dharma plays almost a similar role. The idea of, am I saying it correctly? Dharma is playing a similar role, because what I'm learning about the Mahabharata is that is probably the core of what it's about in a sense. Yeah. Is about like the stasis and order. And the center of it is the Bhagavad Gita, which is the internal conflict of Arjuna as he's coming to an understanding of his duty, his relationship to God and the society that he's in. Yeah. And we do have a couple pages of this like 4,000 page thing or whatever. So it's obviously
we do justice, I think. We do
justice, but it's just like, it's obviously a very involved philosophical text. Yeah. And it's very influential in not just in the East, but in the West, actually. Yeah. And so we are portraying it. You do get a little snippets of some important ideas within that. But I'm just saying, like, that's the center of it is almost like Arjuna as like the hero kind of coming to terms and understanding this
cosmic reality,
this cosmic reality. Because that to me is, well, we could talk about distinctions between Western mythology as I know it and this, what I'm learning about this. There are also pretty significant distinctions that are interesting, but we could stick with this of like, so you think that's a core part of this, if not the core theme?
Oh yeah. Definitely. So like, what it represents, like from a story perspective, Kurukshetra really is just the battlefield that sits outside of Hastinapur, the kingdom. And that's where they would fight battles. It's called Kurukshetra. Now
that's where the tales take place.
That's where the tales place. And that's a real place. You can go there, you can see it. They say that the soil, it's got a high iron and clay content in the soil. So it's a red soil, but they say the blood that fell in the battle soaked it red for generations. Yeah, but it's a real place. You know?
Yeah.
But what it represents in the story is this sort of mental battlefield. And the concept of Dharma, Dharma is pronounced Dharma in the West also, but that concept is it's central in Hinduism and yoga, and that then it's central to then all the offshoots like Jainism, Buddhism, all the different types of Buddhism. But it's in Sanskrit. There's no real direct translation, but it can translate kind of into the cosmic reality.
Yeah.
The cosmic order of things and a noble, righteous way of engaging with it.
That's how I understood it. Yeah, right. It's like righteous duty, but in a cosmic sense.
Cosmic sense is that you can engage with it in many ways, but there's a way to do it with an order that imparts the least amount of karma. You're being neutral at best.
Yeah.
You say someone's got like a warm energy or someone's got a negative energy, but if you're neutral at the worst and you're just sort of like a neutral person, that's a great way to be because you don't affect anything, but you don't hurt anything. You just sort of. So I'm not saying that, but it's not to be passive. And this story is like explores that sort of distinction between what's passive and action. And it's also exploring these themes of, at the time, it was like a story that really did redefine the sort of cultural landscape.
Yes. Yeah.
Because, moving away from these gods like Indra, the god of gods, and the god of the sun, and the god of this, all of our characters, like Arjuna, Karna, even on the other side, they're born of demigods and mortal women. So like Achilles, he's like a half-breed.
Yeah.
Divine, but not really divine. He's limited by what's human, but he's divine in his mortal in the mind, but divine in his powers, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So those are make great fertile ground for great war epics, right?
Yes.
So they represent this battlefield and Krishna. Again, you're right. This snapshot again, this certain section of like the prequel or like the not prequel. Preface to the war, that's what we call the Bhagavad Gita. And Krishna is
wait. The preface, I thought he stopped in the middle of the battle.
No, he's at the beginning of the battle. He's supposed to start the battle, and he drives his chariot. His chariot is driven by Krishna.
I remember,
and what's unique about Krishna's chariot,
interesting.
And this is Arjuna will ride on a special chariot.
Yeah.
Okay? It's a chariot of the gods. It's drawn by 5 horses that represent your 5 senses. And God or Krishna is holding the reins, kind of like allowing it to move.
Interesting.
It is blessed by Hanuman, who is Bhima's god older brother, son of the wind also, from the Ramayana epic, so that it cannot be moved, it's stable. Unlike Karna's Rath, who gets stuck in the earth, Arjuna's Rath is invulnerable.
Yeah.
He's chosen by God. And Arjuna had to win all of these things. So he goes on this 12-year journey where he lives alone as a warrior monk and goes and conquers all the gods and gets all the weapons. And because he's a hero, he can't be, other characters in our tale, there's this theme that comes up that you pray to these certain gods, these lesser gods or these demigods. And if you please them, they'll bless you with knowledge and a weapon. Especially if you're a warrior. But because Arjuna is destined and born this divine, prince, his tests are different. Like Hercules had these tests of strength. He has to actually fight Shiva. He has to actually fight Indra. He has to actually fight these people. And that's why he's like the Achilles character. He's the only character that has defeated all the gods. It's one of, Arjuna has 10 names, and one of his name is Vijay, the one that cannot be beat.
So Arjuna defeats gods,
all
like
of
actual
the gods.
gods.
Yeah, and that's how he gets his astras. Like the Pashupatastra that we talk about, Shiva's astra. Arjuna is in tapasya. He's in austere meditation.
I'm trying to think if there's any Greeks that defeated all the gods. I mean, there is a kind of later tradition of Hercules doing something like that, but not like Zeus and all. I mean, there is a separation where the gods are often battling or bickering or fighting, but the kids aren't really, aren't really fighting the gods much. And there's like so that's an interesting distinction.
It's a very interesting distinction.
I have heard of again, I don't know when it starts. There is a point where it's like, okay, they do mess with the gods.
And that's the Bhagavad Gita. That's the distinction point. Because if you look at the court of Indra, it's very much like the court of Zeus. Indra can control lightning bolts.
Yeah, he's the Zeus.
He's the Zeus. And he has all the traits. He's a womanizer. He has all these different.
I think all the gods are kind of womanizers.
Yeah, and he has all those little traits, right? And in he's got a god of war. He's got a god of dance. He's got goddesses, and he's got a whole court of these folks.
Yeah.
And that's also what the Greek mythology has. But that was like the penultimate, those levels of gods. What the whole story of Mahabharata, like Krishna, the whole story of Krishna and the whole story is in defiance of those gods and in service of Dharma. Dharma is like this cosmic force, that which existed before the Big Bang.
Wait, so you're saying that it's in defiance of the gods is what the Mahabharata is kind of showing?
Krishna, the character Krishna.
Oh, Krishna.
But what the spiritual significance or the religious significance, if you will, of the Bhagavad Gita is that what really is God is not Krishna. It's indivisible. It's that which is in you, that which is in me. That's why in Indian language we say namaste. In Hindi we say namaste. It means I bow to the divinity in you. I recognize that same life force in you. And Krishna says this is all Maya. This is all forms. Dharma. The Buddhists talk. The concept that the Buddhists say about Dharma is all of the dharmas are emptiness.
Yeah.
It's all emptiness in this form. You exist, but you are no different from it. And we know that like in molecular science that really the atoms that are flowing in you and me and all of this are really, there's no difference between it. It's like, it's there's no, even the space between us and the space that we are, it's all of this atomic stuff. And so the ancients were just talking about it that way. But that is very much in defiance of having individual gods. Because individual gods, they control your harvest, they control everything about sociology. Sure. Every time you have the rain, a drought, you're going to pray to the water gods. Sorry, every time you have a drought, you're going to pray to the water gods because you want rain. Yeah. And if it doesn't, so you go to the temples and you give money, and then they can tax the temples and all. It's a whole infrastructure about these gods. And one of the stories of Krishna is that he defies Indra, and he's like, no, you might as well. Why are you worshiping Indra? Indra is not the cosmic reality, and Indra doesn't care.
That's in Bhagavad Gita.
This is a childhood story of Krishna.
Oh, okay, of Krishna.
Yeah, and so he defies Indra. And Indra brings the rain. Yeah, brings the rain. He's angry. How did you defy me? You're supposed to be worshiping me. This is the season where you should be worshiping me. And Krishna said, listen. No. I just want to make sure I'm keeping in a good vocal range.
Yeah, you're good.
To have some good warmth. Yeah.
You're great, man.
So he defied this demigod. And the demigod got angry, of course. Because the demigod has the personality of a man, but what is God exists beyond any of those forms. This is what's purported by Krishna, and Krishna says instead of praying to this deity Indra that does nothing for you, it's just an idea. Might as well venerate the cow because you're a vegetarian. Everything comes from it. Your butter comes from it. Your milk comes from it. Your hide comes from it. Your bones and tools come from it. I mean, everything comes from the cow, and that's how this idea of venerating cows and Krishna comes.
Interesting,
because it was really in defiance that you might. This is.
I knew there had to be a religious element.
Yeah, that's
like Catholicism has like some weird.
Oh yeah,
stuff
and it goes to dogma now. If you go to India and someone's going down the street in a bicycle and he sees a cow, he's like. Yeah. So it's translated into these things, but that was a story.
But okay, I have a question because you're getting into the religious aspect.
Yeah, keep it.
No, but I have a question.
Steer it because we will go.
No, since we're there. So because this really makes me think of the transition in Greece, Rome. Like if you read from Homer, if you read a lot of the major texts from Homer to Dante, you actually see the same kind of, this is Christianity basically, where it becomes this many gods. And then the gods, like in Virgil, the gods become really, they're still kind of humanish, but they don't have near as much foibles as they do in Homer and Virgil. And that is, like the 1st century BC or CE, it's right at the turn of it's right around the time of Christ, like right after that. And so they start kind of almost coalescing the gods in literature and in the stories being told, until the point where I think you start getting arguments by the Christians who had already come, and they are kind of preaching this one God type, this monotheism type idea that there's just one super God, and why are you praying to your crops? Right? It's the same kind of argument they made, I think. And but so go ahead.
But the distinction there is that it's not monotheist. So the God in the monotheistic sense is that it's an entity. It's like a knowing entity. It can have action. Well, that's the God in like like what Aristotle's metaphysics.
Oh, you're saying different from.
So what the Hindus are saying, what here is that
they're not saying it's an embodied.
It's not an embodied. Yeah. It has no personality. It's that's why Dharma just means cosmic order.
But I mean, from my perspective, there's not that big of a difference in terms of actual. I mean, like I'm an atheist, right? So So like from my perspective, it's like, because when you'll talk to Christians, they'll have embodiments of it. Like there's the body of the Christ, the Holy Spirit, and the Son or whatever. But they really mean it. And when they talk about it, it's in the same kind of way where it's like, he's in everybody. He's in everything. It's in God is everywhere. He's in you, he's in me, he's in the carpet, he's in the grass. It's all one universe out of his cosmic consciousness. And it's really like, it's from a perspective of the metaphysics. My view is they're very similar in what they're basically advocating for, which is a oneness of everything. And, you'll even see Christians sometimes move into a more that kind. And I think my assumption is there has to have been a lot of Eastern influences. Like I think Platonic views, Plato is getting, like, there's a lot of evidence that he probably got a lot of influence from, Eastern influences, which kind of made this idea of, moving up the philosophical ladder to the oneness of concepts, which was the Platonic theory. And,
it's always like building, right? So some of this stuff goes back to like family, all of these early humans moving up and down the Fertile Crescent and, coming, something goes back. Telling all these stories. And there's no, it's no coincidence that like simultaneously you have this Vedic knowledge about like meditation and understanding cosmic order and cosmic law that is atheistic. I mean, you have like in that you have Dvait and Advait. Advait is an atheistic like Hindu way of life, but so it's totally atheistic. And you also have this like Platonic thinking. You have philosophers, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but they would even preach like go out of the cities, go meditate, go away. I'm blanking on the word of it, what this like group of folks.
Well, they do it in Christianity called ascetics.
Yes.
Essentially. I mean, there's a whole variety of those.
But these were in like the Greeks, so way before Christianity. You had this idea of go away and experience, be silent, experience what it is to have your senses, experience all of these things. And there
I think
you have all of this like...
I think that's a human thing.
Oh, it's
right? It's just like you get so overwhelmed with like all the people around you, and there's corruption, and city has, and then it's like go out into nature and just like, be one with nature for a little bit, like just chill out, turn your cell phone off.
But very, very different from an organized religion. That's the thing. So temples and churches are like industry. And then if you're talking about like the Roman Catholicism, that became like almost industrial, right? I mean, that's when the Roman Empire fell.
Yeah.
Then Charlemagne and the church got...
There's a distinction I think you can make between the belief system and ideas and the organized church. I always do like belief in church. And because like church is a physical, it's a building, you pay for it, people live within it, you give up tithes to it or whatever. And it has all kinds of machinations and its own kind of systematic desires
and control.
But you can believe without it, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, like that was like what Jesus kind of preached was, you know, like God is in you. You don't need to go here to get God type thing. And Christians have always battled over that, right? And like Catholics and Protestants, that's what they're protesting against essentially. So it's the same kind of same. So again, it's like very human. And the kind of battle between your ideas that you hold, your deepest metaphysical, epistemological belief systems, and the ways in which in our lives we kind of by necessity have to build structures to help teach and facilitate and understand them, and then how those get corrupted over time, or they can be corrupted, and so then there's a backlash often of romanticism, and so it's like definitely an up and down.
And what you're explaining. That is exactly what the exposition between Krishna and Arjuna is.
He's trying to deal with, because the Mahabharata is about this Dharma, which is the disorder that's happening because they're not being dutiful and like, you know, righteous in a cosmic sense. And, you know, they're trying to think of themselves. Like I think one of the so I haven't read the Bhagavad Gita. I do want to read it at some point. I'll read. But
exactly what you were explaining about this sort of like you need the hierarchy and you have to reach people where they are.
Yeah.
Some people in Bhagavad Gita it talks about that. Some people are jnani. They need to be understanding the intellectual side of it. They're atheists. They don't need to experience faith. Some people are completely faith oriented. They're bhaktis. Right? They want to believe and they need that system. And it's nothing wrong about it. They come to the same like conclusion. Whether you're saying like the philosophical point of what God is or God is an entity that I have to worship, it translates in the same. You know what I mean? Translates.
Yeah.
That's what the Dharma. Yeah. That's what Dharma talks about.
Yeah.
So in the Gita, Krishna goes through all of this. He says he gives like detailed philosophy on this sort of atheistic, non-personal, just concrete philosophy. And then Arjuna says, I don't understand. And then he says, okay, I'm going to give you more about like just how to do it. How do you live with karma?
Yeah.
Arjuna says, I still don't understand. And at the very, very end, then Krishna says, okay, if you don't understand, then believe in me. And then he shows like his God form.
Yeah. So it's like and this is transcending
exactly
like that's concrete belief.
That's only moving one. So faith, bhakti is in one part of the Gita.
Yeah.
And that's where it's quoted, Oppenheimer quoted that, behold, I've become death, destroyer of worlds.
Yeah.
Death is mistranslated. He'd mistranslated. Kalo means time.
Yeah.
That's even more scary than death because it's like it's forever. And so that's a tattooed there actually. So
is that what that is?
Yeah, that's what that line is. So but that's where Krishna is saying that I am become time. If you can't believe in your duty, can't believe in the logic, if you can't believe in all of these other things, then I got something else for you.
Yeah.
Try this.
Which is faith.
And so it covers this atheist and non-atheist views. And so that's where some of this some of the broader, and I think that's why that story, the Bhagavad Gita, has been so broadly adopted and been so broadly applied, because you can translate it and you can get the philosophy and you can get great life lessons, and it's then ultimately a discourse in the broader Mahabharata, also a discourse on what it means to be living virtuous, what it means to be, one of the main dilemmas of our thing is honesty synonymous with truth. That's a debate.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's one of the broader themes.
Yeah.
But honesty is one of the virtues that Dharma says that if you're going to live in the world, you have to at least have an understanding of honesty. Now, what honesty is, the rest of the Mahabharata and all these other things can debate it.
Yeah.
But so I think it's endured because it has such broad application.
Well, so what do we have an idea of when it becomes like either written or told, or the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita in particular? Like, do we have an era, any kind of dates? I know
we can look it up. I think it's 500 years, maybe BCE.
Okay.
Before Christ.
So, okay.
And
so
then the Ramayana is even older than that. Let's look it up.
Yeah. But so that's interesting. So
it's many hundred years BCE.
Yeah. So that's like 200 years before classical Greece.
Yeah.
That's after Homer, though. So Homer, Gilgamesh, these are all before. Because my understanding is that one of the...
Oh, wow, I was way off.
Yeah.
The date of the Mahabharata war is estimated to be between 1197 BCE and 3137 is the range.
But what about the Bhagavad Gita?
Thousand.
But what about was the Bhagavad Gita part of it originally?
Yes.
You sure?
Absolutely. Can
you look that up for me?
Yeah.
I want to make sure, like...
They're all... They're all. It's from that. It's like
we're talking about an oral tradition, is what I'm saying. So, like, when you talk about Homer he's writing in 800 BC, like, right? But he is writing about a story that happened 300 years in 1100 BC. But there's hundreds of years of the story being told, in terms of orally told, right? Passed on generation after generation. But it's not told in the way that Homer does it until Homer, obviously. And then it's kind of, so this is the interesting thing about oral traditions is they change over time, they get additions, things are adapted to it. So I'm just wondering if the Bhagavad Gita...
that's what they're saying, the estimates are about 500 BC.
For the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
See, that makes sense to me. Yeah, so it's like... Yeah,
the time of the Kuru dynasty, so that's what I was saying, is like thousands of years before.
Yeah, so this is like this ancient story that kind of discusses the like, because what I'm seeing in it is it's a man's relationship to the gods, right? And it has changed with the Bhagavad Gita. And that, to me, is one of the additions that must have come later. So the stories were there for thousands of years, right? Of Bhima and Bhishma and the Kauravas and the Pandavas, and they're battling. And,
the exposition.
But the internal struggle of Arjuna and then the Bhagavad Gita, that comes later.
Absolutely.
That someone added that in a time. This is what I find fascinating about this. So it's like, in other words, there was thousands of years in India where they were influenced by this story. Yes. And they were living this life of, praying to this, praying to that, fighting here, fighting there, everyone's battling. But then somebody came up with a literary construct.
That's exactly
which is an internal conflict of a character. And they put this together in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what he called it right away or whatever, but he put it together in this like several hundred pages of a discourse between Krishna, who's actually...
And I'm going to blow your mind. I'm going to add something to this.
But you see what I'm saying? Like that,
you were absolutely right.
I knew that was...
You are 100% right. You are not only 100% right, but it's even more complex.
Well, it's definitely complex.
We have a character called Vyasa.
Yes, yeah.
Vyasa is generally accepted to be one of the authors, one of the great authors of the Upanishads. He's written about in the Vedas. And so that's over.
Those are other story books, right?
The Vedas is not a story. Those are just a compilation of all this oral history of like
other stories.
The basis of Hinduism. It's not stories.
Oh,
it's like
sorry.
actual,
okay.
Yeah.
See, this is how ignorant I am.
So that's
still learning.
But that's why I'm saying like Vyasa is not even one person. It's hundreds of different Vyasas. Like same with Patanjali for yoga. Patanjali is not considered to be one guy. So no one sat down. We have the story that Vyasa and Ganesh are sitting there writing. Yeah. But the reality is these stories were told over thousands of years. Sure. And the stories about the Gita, just like you're saying, probably came up in it. Like, how do you explain all this knowledge? Well, let's write a story of Arjuna. You guys know the story of Arjuna.
Yes.
That's exactly how there's stories about Daniel Boone. There's stories about Davy Crockett. I grew up with stories about Davy Crockett that I don't know if they're real or not.
And like modern Marvel stories are different than 70s,
and they
1970s.
Impart virtue. They impart.
But I'm saying like
conflict.
They changed. Like the culture changed a little bit. So Superman today is different than Superman in 1950.
And they're different authors that still are writing about the same story.
But it's the same character. So they're taking this. Yeah. So that is what I'm talking. And
that's
I knew.
Exactly
so the
right.
Bhagavad Gita was an addition by some philosopher in India, basically.
Now, I don't know if I want to say the word addition or not, but like you said, it is this giant oral. Now, whether the Bhagavad Gita was like a central part of that story from the beginning or not, I'm not.
Well, I thought that's what you found out. Is that when was the Bhagavad Gita?
When it was codified, was in that range. But what I'm telling you is there's for sure we know that it was not just one person sitting down and say I'm.
No, I understand that. Oh,
like even that idea of Vyas being the author.
You think that with the Bhagavad, because it feels like it's an addition, is what I'm saying. So it feels like
it's a chapter in an epic.
Yeah, but
dude, like there's like.
So okay, this is an interesting challenge about the Mahabharata and just me beginning studies of this is it seems like the East in general, and particularly India, which I don't know as much about China yet. I'd like to learn more, but authorship is not, in terms of external author, is not as big of a deal. Right. Like in the West, starting with Homer, who wrote it is a big deal, right? And they make a big deal out of it. Like people today are like, does Homer even exist? Back then it was like a big deal. It's like he was the author. Aeschylus is the author. He's the creator of these things. It comes from his mind in a sense. Now they had a view of like, it's in a relation to the gods. Sing to me, O muses of the rage of Achilles. So he's like praying to this god, but it's through him. But so like I'm noticing that nested within Indian stories is this. They use it as a framework, but the external author's not that critical. So like who actually wrote it down is not that critical. So I imagine studying it becomes challenging because we can study ancient Greeks who wrote about the 800 BC guy named.
But this is what I'm telling you, Kirk, is that the oldest copies of the Mahabharata
that were written down
on Sanskrit, and Sanskrit was
500 BC.
Yeah, and when you have the oldest copies of written down Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita is in there, and it's just a separate, essentially those chapters. So there's no copies of the Mahabharata that exist that don't have the Bhagavad Gita in it. So I'm just correcting that.
Okay,
so the story, by the time it was written down and like carried on, there's the central part of telling that story is not that people are fighting. The central part of telling that story is the knowledge of the Gita. All the characters around it,
from somewhere.
Of course, it had to come from somewhere, but I don't think that there were characters named Duryodhana, there might not have been, but there was a kingdom named Hastinapur. There was a king named Bharat that existed way, way, way before.
Oh, you're talking about history.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is from a literary standpoint, the oldest versions of the Bhagavad, like the oldest versions of the Mahabharata, have that knowledge in it. It's not like they say, well, I'm going to republish this thing hundreds of years. It's not like for example, the Christian Bible, where they have these councils where they edit it and they say, I'm going to put things in and I'm going to take things out.
Yeah.
So I'm just correcting that there's this.
That's a Western concept.
It's a Western concept, but it doesn't apply to the Mahabharata. There is a story of the Mahabharata. A section of that is the Bhagavad Gita.
So, I mean,
they're not two separate stories. There's a section of that story is the Bhagavad Gita. Now, but I can understand that as it's recorded down. We know that Vyasa is not the same Vyasa that could have been alive. How can someone be alive thousands of years and recording things in the Vedas?
Sure.
Same with so this is an oral tradition that existed before Sanskrit was written.
I mean, I want to learn more about this. What I'm seeing quickly is in modern scholars it's a major debate of what you're talking about. Of like, what I'm saying is, so...
Is that quickly on Wikipedia?
Yeah, so I don't know if it's true.
Okay, so I'm just saying it's a Wikipedia.
No, it's not Wikipedia. I did two different searches. I want to look into it more. What I'm saying, what they're debating is that there were aspects of it added later of the Bhagavad Gita. I don't know what those aspects are because I want to spend some more time reading and studying. Yeah. But all I'm saying is I understand where you're coming from. You're saying there's just long traditions, thousands of years that the characters in it were always there. That it's not like there's like, oh, let's just put a new character in there. Let's put some.
Yeah, and you're also like you're also conflating like the translations of it. Sure. And the expositions of it, because they're like Paramahansa Yogananda. The biggest in America, I think the most common one is people would abide like Paramahansa Yogananda's Gita. Or there's a Hare Krishna movement have a great Gita. Like those are people that because this is a poem. It's written in verse. It's just like that's one line that describes like a whole bunch of it. And then after this verse is there, then you debate. Well, what does this mean?
Sure.
And then like Tilak wrote one.
Yeah.
Yogananda, Ramakrishnan wrote one. Sure. These are all great sages in hundreds and thousands of different years who've written about this subject. And that is where all the religious stuff comes from.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk about like the literary poem versus all of the philosophy that's written about it,
Yeah,
those are different conversations.
Yeah, the literary poem has been
the
there for
literary
thousands.
poem has been a literary poem, and that in that there are these sections in the poem because you can't rewrite. I mean, it has this many stanzas, it has this kind of a meter. It's a giant song.
Yes,
it's meant to be sung. When we do it in India, they have leelas. They just sing it. The Ramayana is just sung, and then they act it out.
The question is, when does language come involved in that? Written language, I mean, when does that part? That's the 500, right? More.
All I'm saying is that the earliest copies of that poem that is written, called the Mahabharata.
Oh, that's the thousands.
Okay, that a section of that, the middle chapters, has always been included. So it's not like that has been come up something yet. Now all of the debate. Huh?
What do you mean always been included though? Like so, for the 3,000 years.
Yeah, so if you go back and you find the oldest dated, let's just look that up. What's the oldest dated Mahabharata copy? Oldest dated.
I'm going to look this, like I want to buy a book and study this. This is
and there's thousands of books on it.
Yeah, because, I don't want to read thousands of books. I just want to read one.
That's what I'm saying. There's so many.
Because it seems like it's a debate. Like it does seem like there's a debate going on.
So but
I'm curious.
and there's periods of it too. Like
sure.
So you have periods like what we know of like the surviving Gita or surviving like Mahabharata. Some of it the Gupta dynasty like saved. Some of it was saved here, and then there's thousands of years of invasion.
Yeah.
Of like different dynasties. So like what we have are all these fragments. That's what I can understand that. Okay, fine. That there's how we reassembled it. That's why again we don't know if there's one author because you have this old dynasty or the fragments we have here say well this is how this kind of writing is, and then you have fragments here with the different kind of writing. So you have between like the 3rd and 5th century all of these different reassemblies of the information, and you compiled a big story.
No, that's the same thing in Greek mythology. No, I get the process. But I do know that there's always a shift that happens when it goes into writing.
Exactly.
And so the issue to me is, like, before it was written, it was passed down.
Yeah.
And whenever something's passed down orally, we know this by tracing modern oral things. It's like people can embellish things, they could change things. They're basically going on a model in their heads of types of things. So things are changed. There's slight. But once it's written, then you can kind of analyze it. You can criticize it. You can add to it. You could translate it in different ways. You could interpret it in all kinds of different ways. There's modern feminists who are reinterpreting Helen of Troy and all these. And it's like.
And these tales too.
Yeah, it was 100%, Draupadi and all that. Yeah. So that happens, but what I'm saying is, and we could just end and move on to, the other stuff, because this is a philosophical debate that'll go on forever, and I want to learn more before I go into it more, because I just don't know. I mean, I'm just, like I said, I'm just exploring and kind of from what I know.
And I think we're circularly arguing the same sort of.
Well, I think there's similarities, but it's just, my contention is that from what I've understood and the little bit that I have been reading is that there was something unique that was added at a certain point, or added in the sense of retranslated that became influential, however you want to think of it. In the same way as that's what Homer did. Mm-hmm. So Homer's taking all these stories and, codifying it and just taking a few days at the end, and he's creating a theme around that.
Absolutely.
And he's doing something very unique that writing allows for, and oral tales told in a variety of different ways from a variety of different priests doesn't allow for. Yeah. So that's just an interesting thing, that writing changes the whole medium, like the medium is the form or the medium is the way type thing.
Absolutely. And that's all of these things have been interpreted so many different ways. Like, there's such a, even the history that's so ancient. Like there's ancient history, recorded history of someone named Krishna.
Yeah.
Now, how do we know that he's done all these things? Because there's these mythologies built around him, just like you're saying. Who wrote each of the mythologies? I don't know. Like I know stories of Davy Crockett.
Sure.
But I don't know and if he did any of that stuff. And I don't know. I know stories of Achilles. I don't know if he did any of this. And I don't know who really embellished some of that stuff. But what I can say is that it's not generally debated what the miracles of Christ are. everyone says like they can interpret it different ways. It's not generally debated what were the different challenges of Hercules. And it's not generally debated what the different unique things that Arjun did. Like, you see what I'm saying? So like there's certain
like
things.
there's certain core elements that never change. Yes.
And like I said, the philosophy is there. But again, like even the oldest dated Mahabharats that they can catch are not complete. They've been you know what I mean? So you have to take this one, and then you have to take something that existed 1,000 years earlier and say, okay, well.
But that's the nature of mythology. Mythology is just a couple of, it's some concretized abstractions that passed down for thousands of years.
Exactly.
And that people then can take and reinterpret. So there's one of my favorite examples is Nathaniel Hawthorne's Tanglewood Tales, where and you could see this in like Edith Hamilton and other people who are writing or Bulfinch's mythology, which I like. But in Nathaniel Hawthorne, he was writing a kid's book essentially that is about the mythology, about these Greek mythologies, but he's he's changing it a little bit. He's making it more, romantic. He's making more about flowers and, like things like that, which are there in the Greeks too, but he's emphasizing that a little bit more.
And I imagine that's how they had all of these, like, a poem I always think of as like an economy of lines, economy of words, because you have to tell a lot with that's why we have verse. Like there's rules to be able to like tell a lot in a story. Right. And especially these kind of poems, which say something like Yudhishthira said, I killed a man, Ashwatthama. If it was an elephant or a man, I can't tell. Now, was that a lie or not? So the line in the poem is just that line. And then all the philosophy is written about, is that a lie or not? Well, but right? But what I'm saying is, even that story of how should you tell it? How should we, that must have been hundreds of years. I'm just putting a number to it, but that would have been generations of holy people saying, I tried to try it this line, and every time I gave a sermon, no one understood it. So let's rewrite that. So I'm saying, like, all of these authors just say it's Vyasa. To your point,
sure,
where like it because it is an oral tradition and it is a story, it would have been refined and grown and grown and grown to be ultimately what an aphorism is, a boiled down.
Well, and then they can, different aphorisms over time. I mean, one thing I found interesting was it's been discovered for like philologists have studying this, that many of the Grimm's stories that they were kind of gathering, because Grimm's brothers, they're philologists, they went out, they took all these like German folk tales and kind of compiled them and wrote them in the German vernacular. But what they discovered and what has been discovered since is like almost 50% of them are Indian in origin.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of tales that come out of, but the idea is like, as it transmitted into different cultures, that culture is going to grasp it in different ways. Right. And so the issue of mythology is it's just these broad ideas in embodied forms or concrete forms that are then interpreted in, like you're saying, in a million different ways. Yeah. I can interpret it in whatever way that I want to,
and accumulated over time, like so the concept and the Hindu philosophy, like it in itself tries to explain this. It says like this is like the concept of a sutra. It's just a thread in a rope. Because it's an oral tradition, you're going to get it translated through me. Like, I can tell you what my version of this is because I've had all my gurus explain this to me.
Sure.
But someone with different gurus are going to have a different interpretation.
Yeah.
So you take both of those
that's
sutras.
The same thing with Christianity.
Yeah, so but even with the story, they say you take both of these things and you wrap it together, and that becomes eventually a cable. And now when you talk about the Gita, now it's irrefutable.
Yeah.
Now this is exactly what the Gita is. The Gita is this chapter. Yeah. It's exactly this verse. That's what it is.
Yeah, there's a firm understanding of what
that's a combination of so many thousands of threads, sutras that come together, and then they say this is the best way to do it. Which is why you have this weird concept of Vyasa.
This is an interesting
Vyasa
difference.
Is just the author.
Yeah. Well, he's the author, but he's in the story.
He's in the story.
Like he's not the author in the way that Homer's the author.
Yeah.
I mean, Homer puts himself in the story a little bit as the narrator, But I mean, it seems that's something I'd like to explore as well at some point, is like authorship in East versus East and West. There's differences.
And Vyasa, the character, he's human, but he's like transcended.
He's also transcended.
Yeah, so he can exist.
He's kind of like a narrator.
Yeah.
He is the narrator, but it's a nesting that they do of stories within stories sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes I think it's kind of like,
often
in a modern interpretation, it's just kind of like lazy writing, because you're like, oh, just make it Vyasa.
Oh, I don't think
I'm just a joke.
fair,
it's a very bad comparison,
okay,
but it's sort of like, well, Vyasa, you assign attributes to Vyasa.
I mean, you could say that about like the God of the Machine in Greek plays, right?
But this is
Ex
one
Machina,
character.
and it's just like, well, I'm just saying like Euripides would do that, where he would like, put in, oh, let me just fix this with the God coming down and fixing it. That's lazy writing.
Yeah.
And I think back then it wasn't, like, it meant something.
Yeah. And it's more like probably title. It's more like probably writing in the name of Vyasa, but it's accepted even in philosophy, like I said, in yoga, and in multiple different philosophies that come from Hinduism, like the Yoga Sutras. It's Patanjali Yoga Sutras. But exactly to your point, it was not one guy, Patanjali, who said, I'm going to write down everything that I know from all the oral traditions of my lifetime. I'm going to write a memoir, and it's going to be called Patanjali Yoga Sutras, and everyone's going to take this and go for it. What we recognize is that was accumulated over a long, long time. And
that's where like the Old Testament or something.
Yeah, but maybe it was in service. Maybe it was someone was saying, I'm not going to write my name on it. We're just going to say Patanjali.
Yeah.
Right? Unless there really was one guy named, if you're going to choose to believe that there was a guy named Vyasa who was transcended, and he alone could exist.
Well, sure, like
over those 1,000 years.
Once you get into theology, it's different.
Yeah,
right?
so
then people are studying it in it.
But I come at from like an atheistic view like you, and I'm like, that's not one guy. This is really like there's
just too much evidence. Like if you want to, I don't want to. Well, if you want to believe in whatever, I don't want to tell you not to believe in something, but there's just a lot of evidence that the way that these stories transmit, there's a science to it. There's literally a science of investigating the actual ways that they move through societies, they move through cultures, and the oral traditions and things like that. So I think it's pretty clear that, you would, an imaginative writer would create a character like Vyasa as a narrator, as one technique. I mean, I think War and Peace has, like, it's two, is it War and Peace? Like, where it's like, there's, it's the Russians did this sometimes, where they would have like, I know Dostoevsky would sometimes do this, I think, and like, basically be a story told by two characters in a town, right? And they're telling the story of something that happened. Like, that's just a common technique that he's using. We know that this is a technique used in writing fiction and literature, whatever you want to call it. So it's clearly that's what's going on.
And the people
even with
who
the Bible, even with, that one had more of a structure once the New Testament comes.
And when you're talking about like authors of these like religious texts or these like spiritual texts, you also have this like added layer of confusion that these folks are often born into an order, right? So you're born as a human, your name is Kirk, and then you say, well, I'm going to join this Hindu temple so that I can sort of work on this, and I'm reborn as a Hindu. What's your chosen name now? I choose Vyasa.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
So then how many times you people get confirmed, and how many Michaels, how many, in a Catholic confirmation. So you choose a name, you're given a name. So that's, that's another added layer that how many people were just born into an order and took the name,
Yeah.
and how random was over so many centuries. So it's a very, very strange thing, but it's
interesting. Like it's how stories, because to me, why I'm interested in this, like I said at the beginning, but it's a different aspect of this, is like, I'm very interested in how stories and literature in particular, not only shape, but they coalesce a society. So like there's a pre-Homeric Greece, there's a post-Homeric Greece. And I think part of what made Greece, and Augustus during his reign in like the first century, or whatever AD, what is it, like 50 AD or something, when he's like dies or something. So I don't remember his exact dates, but somewhere around there. Anyway, like what Homer did was, you have all these Greek city-states, and then eventually it's like they are all people who have read and of the and they're coalesced by the language in particular, because they all speak the same language, they all tell the same stories. So that's the Greeks now. So now you know that those 100 city-states are now Greece, and that becomes a thing. They're unified because of that. And I think the same type of thing must happen in India. It happened with the Tang dynasty, with the poetry. That's so like there's just a variety of that kind of, thing. So that to me is really interesting of how it coalesces. And Mahabharata is obviously critical for that. And it's still shaping India today, which like Homer's not, I mean, he's, in a sense, we're all Greek, and because the ideas of individualism has passed down. We're all Roman because the ideas of duty and civic duty and things like that from an external source that passed down for thousands of years through the European dynasties and things like that. Those about so he's alive in that sense, but he's not alive in quite the robust way that I think Mahabharata tales are in India today. Like I had Kumar Abhinav on who plays Bhishma in our story. And he was just telling me about how, all the little anecdotes and in the language, how they call each other, like I don't remember all of them, but it's like, if you're having a family feud, everyone's fighting. It's like a X. It's like this, like you're saying, he's in a Mahabharata or something. I don't know what the word is. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, it's so embedded in the story, in the language. I mean, I guess that's true of Greek. Like we still have so much Greek language. So it's the same kind of thing in the West actually.
And then there's all these like other stories, right? So each character, there's so many different stories about, like Bhima, for example. So many stories. And again, we don't know they're irrefutable that there is a Bhima in this story.
Yeah.
But depending on which versions or which surviving stories, then you accumulate all these crazy stories about it.
As a writer, that's just such a robust thing to do. It's just like my favorite example for Hercules is Seneca. So Seneca, the Stoic, he wrote a Hercules play, and it's such an interesting story for people to understand what Stoicism is all about. Have you read it? Yeah. So it's like basically what's going on is Hercules is beating everything, and every time he beats everything, he becomes more and more powerful. And Zeus's wife, or Jupiter's wife, what's the Roman? So it's Hera, or what's the Roman version? Shit. Don't know. Can't remember her name. I'm blanking. There's too many names. But anyway, so Hera, the wife of Zeus,
I thought it was Hera, but
no, that's the Greek.
That's the Greek.
Yeah, that's the Greek version. So it might actually, sometimes it's both. Sometimes I think it's the same in both, and I forget.
Hera and Athena?
No, Athena is Athena. She's a different god. Yeah.
Okay, so Hera,
Athena's the daughter of Zeus. She comes out of his head. The wife is Hera. But anyway, so Hera, the wife, she hates Hercules. He's the son from a different wife. And anyway, so she's always trying to give him the labors and kill him and do all this stuff, and he keeps winning, and he gets more and more powerful. And then at the end, basically, she contrives an incident where he kills someone he loves, and then he destroys himself, which is the whole Stoic philosophy in a nutshell, basically. So you have a Stoic philosopher taking a myth that everybody knows, telling it in a story in a way that conveys Stoicism.
Yeah.
And that has to happen in Mahabharata with all these different, sects that are kind of taking them and manipulating them in their own ways.
Yeah.
And saying like, here's a new story. I mean, it's an old story, but I'm going to tell it to you differently.
And that we do know about in modern times, because you can see the versions and you can see things, particularly in Hinduism, like Ganesha, another character I play is Ganesha. Mm-hmm. You can see that the tales and the stories about him grow when there's a need for renewed stories in religion, because all of a sudden you're occupied for 2,000-3,000 years by foreign kings that don't allow you to have temples anymore, but you can study that stuff in your house. So then you need how do you translate? You can't go to the mountains, you can't talk, so how do you translate it? Well, let's write all these stories about Shiva. The Purans, we call it, the Puranic period. So then you have all the stories about Ganesha. He cut his, all those stories that we talk about in the story.
Go check out the Mahabharata.
Check out the Mahabharata. We talk about the origins of the elephant-headed god Ganesha. Yeah. But these are all born of necessity and thousands of years of how do you repackage this? How do you repackage virtue? And I also wonder about what social changes were happening? What were the social movements that suddenly were now we have to write about this? Because there has to be, and there still is, a great deal of like propaganda in there. I mean, I know that when Kumar was on, like one of the things y'all talked about was like the role of Draupadi, which is controversial.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up Draupadi.
Yeah.
Is it pronounced Draupadi?
Draupadi.
Draupadi.
Yeah, I think we say Draupadi in this, but it's
It's
the Hindi pronunciation would be Draupadi.
Draupadi.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll try.
Yeah, I don't take that. That's the way I was.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing with like Greek myths again, like pronunciation. I've heard multiple ways of doing it sometimes.
Yeah.
So anyway, so Draupadi, she to me feels a lot like either Medea sometimes or a little bit of Helen, but Helen has so much less agency. Oh, Antigone. Antigone was the other one. Antigone is one of my favorite characters. I love Antigone. I think because like they're both so defiant.
Yeah.
So like Draupadi is very defiant. She,
and again, supernatural.
There's a kind of supernatural element to her.
She's a supernaturally born of fire.
That's not in the Antigone I'm talking about, but so there's a difference there, obviously. But well, she's anyway. But I'm talking about like characteristics, right? Like Draupadi, she fights back. Mm-hmm. She is loyal to the people she loves, but she is willing to. It seems like she's willing to buck the patriarchal conventions to kind of act on her own in a sense, or at least advocate for herself in a way that like Gandhari doesn't. Like Gandhari seems much more passive to me in what I'm learning. Kunti is, yeah. And it's like, then you have this fiery woman who has 5 husbands and she's like, and she loves her husband. She saves them at one point. You're like, or is it Dushasana says something like Karna, they were drowning and, she saved them. Yeah. She loves her husbands, but she also wants to, I think, use like, or kind of encourage them to go out and kill these people because of all of this, right? Because she was wronged and she wants revenge. That's what makes me think of Medea, where Medea, do you know the story of Medea and Jason and where he like marries her?
The revenge sort of like.
Is it Jason? Shit.
But you're drawing the conclusion. You're drawing the similarity in that.
Yeah, I think it's Jason. Yeah,
but
they marry, and then he takes her away. So the Greek takes her away, and then they get married, or they having sex and all that fun stuff. And then but he has to get a Greek woman, so he marries a Greek woman. In revenge, she kills her own kids with him. And his new wife, and then like flies off basically. Yeah. And so she gets like, she has real agency. It's like, that's what the play, the Medea is. So anyway, so it feels very Draupadian in a sense, like getting that revenge for the injustice that was done to you by this evil patriarchy.
Yeah. And she's also viewed, and so I grew up with lots of strong, very educated women from a generation that was very male chauvinistic also.
Very what was the last
male chauvinistic.
Male chauvinistic.
Yeah, I mean the culture, the perspective has been shaped, unfortunately, by that.
Well, most cultures, I think.
Most
it takes
cultures.
a while to get out of that.
Of course, but there are still remnants of that.
Sure.
I think that the modern interpretation is that the main reason of the war was Draupadi laughing or Draupadi being assaulted, and so there's a lot of debate over that. But again, one of the interesting things about Draupadi is that she's born of fire, and she purely represents Mata meaning mother, the mother divine, because she's not born of human flesh. In fact, Drupad, the king, her father, was older. He had one son, Shikandi, and Shikandi knew that Shikandi was reincarnated as Amba. It was Amba reincarnated.
I knew it.
So he knew, and he said, "I'm not going to give you an heir. I'm not going to be able to give you an heir." And so this older king was like, "Well, I have to have this feud with Drona. I got to get my revenge on Drona, and I need to have an heir to help me do that. How are we going to do that?" So he goes to the fire. He has a yagna. He has a prayer with this holy man, a fire ceremony. And from the fire comes Drishtadyum, this fire warrior. And then unexpectedly comes the blessing of a daughter, a woman, Draupadi. It's the daughter of Drupad.
Yeah.
And so these were born of a prayer of, I want something to fight for revenge. They were born with the explicit conjuring of mantras, we have that scene where Kunti's conjuring with mantras, explicit things to have babies.
Yes.
Right? So they were conjuring in this fire Drupad's revenge, and Drishtadyumna was born. And Drishtadyumna actually, in the war, will kill Drona down the line. We don't have that character. We've again, one of the snapshots, we got 21 actors, and so we can't. You have to limit some of the characters. There's lots of characters in this thing. But Draupadi again it's a divine woman.
Yeah.
So how is that different than from the other characters? Well, there's a lot of other characters that are so, like you said, different. Amba again is wronged, and then represents something that's not human anymore, because that's the example of the yogic principle of prakaya pravesh, where you can attain a certain amount of cosmic understanding. Your body can leave one person and go into another body. Your soul actually, and your whole reality, which is what Amba, the essence of Amba, came into this new child in the womb and was born and grown into Shikandi. Like any of those reincarnation stories. There was a movie like Birth. There's a lot of these like reincarnation stories where someone is reborn, and like maintains all of that knowledge. So again, she represents something that's metaphysical, not human. And so some of this is interesting, that you have a differentiation between who are human and who are not.
Yeah.
And who are
and even what that means.
Yeah.
Because that, to me, that's one of the interesting things, is what do they mean by that?
What do they mean
in the story? Because taking back to Greek, what that means essentially is the immortality, is that the mortals they're powerful, they're strong, and at some points they even challenge the gods in strength, like you said earlier, but they are mortal. Whereas that's the major differentiation, I think, in Homer in particular, is the mortality and that you're going to die, and they're the deathless ones. Like that's another way of translating, some of the Greek words referring to the gods, I think.
Yeah.
But it's the same kind of thing of like, so I mean, it's the question is like, so Draupadi, she's fire, she has these things, but what else does, like, what is that? What is it that differentiates the human from the god? Like, what is the fundamental thing, right?
Well,
I guess
this is like an immaculate conception here.
Okay, so
there was nothing. She just appeared out of fire. Both of these beings. There was no.
So that's conception. One is immaculate conception.
Yeah. They were just born of fire, purely born of fire.
Yeah.
It's not like Bhishma. Bhishma was a human with the goddess Ganga.
Yeah.
Arjuna.
What about the characteristics of these characters, though? Is it, well, I mean, so they have all kinds of things. Like Bhishma can choose. Little girl we have is so cute.
Yeah.
We have a little girl as an actor, and she's adorable. He could choose the time of his own death. She's the best.
And that's a blessing that he
but that is like an interesting, thing that is not a normal thing a human has.
Exactly.
Right? Like humans don't have that. Achilles has a kind of a version of that. He has a choice in the sense of he's given a prophecy by his mother Thetis of if he stays in Troy, he'll die, but live on forever in name. Or if he goes home, he'll live a long time, but his name will die after him. So that's a prophecy, but it's not like an innate physical trait that like Bhishma has. Bhishma, literally, like if you hit him with a sword, I assume he can't be hit. Right.
No. I mean, he can be subdued.
But he gets like 1,000 arrows in him. Right?
Arjun fills him up. Arjun fills him up with a bunch of Arjuna is the Sanskrit pronunciation. Fills him up with a bunch of arrows.
Yeah.
And he lays there. He just doesn't die. He just
doesn't die. Ugh.
Yeah. So he's able to. He's able to endure a lot.
Yeah.
Which is a big.
But he chooses when he gets to die.
And that's another theme that I'm interested to hear your perspective about. There's a recurring theme that all these characters endure a lot. That's another thing that's unique about Draupadi, is that she has to endure so much.
Well, I think the emphasis seems to be more on duty in Mahabharata tales in general. Like, what is your duty? Whereas Homer, and I think the Greeks, especially Homer, are really like the motivations, the desires are internal and they're selfish in a sense, right? It's individualistic. It's about, like, in a sense, Achilles gives up these values of his system, kleos and time, which is glory and honor. Glory is represented by stuff, and honor is represented by how people talk about you. Like, oh, he's the best because And when he has a slight from Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek, war, then he just kind of abandons them and they all go out and die and things like that. So because he's slighted in this abstract idea of honor, he doesn't have the honor that he wants and the glory that was the whole motivation for him fighting. That's why they all fight in the Iliad, right? Is that if you go out and fight and you make a name for yourself, you'll have what's called an aristeia, and you'll kind of be living on forever in that aristeia, and that glorious moment of, Oza just out there with his sword. Oh, remember that moment? And I'll tell stories about it for generation after generation, and you'll live forever in that way. And then the greater you are, the greater your story.
And the stories will be embellished, and it will grow, and other people will add to it.
But if you don't do anything, if you like there's a line in the movie Troy that I like the movie Troy. People for some reason don't like it today. And I don't know, Brad Pitt.
That's why no one will remember your name. Is that?
Yes, yeah. That's why no one will remember your name. And it's like, that's the idea. If you don't do anything worthwhile, right. If you're not doing anything dangerous.
I wouldn't want to fight him.
Yeah.
That's why no one would remember your name.
Yes.
He takes a shield and rides and he stabs that dude.
That's a great Brad Pitt.
Great Brad Pitt.
Oh, your impression was a good one.
Oh.
But I'm just saying, so it seems to me in the Mahabharata tales that the characters are like Bhima is in a sense a perfect character because he doesn't question anything. He just is always perfect dharma or whatever, perfect loyalty, he just is just the embodiment of pure strength, holding together all the things that he can and fighting everybody off. There's even a moment when you guys say he would make the best king and things like that. He doesn't have the inner conflict, is what I mean.
In our story, but
so fair enough. Yes.
For example, like the way he eats himself to death. So there's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of he's got a lot of rage.
Yeah.
He has a lot of rage.
Yeah.
And that's not considered very noble. I mean, remember these are princes and kings.
Yeah.
These aren't regular brute marauding soldiers. So
that's his flaw in a sense.
Absolutely, a flaw of his that he does not, and that's why the story of him is that he goes and he takes a wife of the Rakshasas, of these sort of death worshippers and Shiva worshippers that eat meat and they do human sacrifice and stuff, because he has this almost like barbarism. And Bhima, he does terrible deeds. And there's a distinction between him, the son of the wind, and Hanuman, who's the son of the wind, who's his eldest brother, and they have an encounter. Again, a story that must have been added to link them. Someone must have been like, oh shit, we can link them. We can propaganda. I didn't mean to swear on here. I'm sorry. But
I'm talking to.
You didn't want to link them. You know what I mean?
Swear. I don't think we have.
But you have Hanuman. That's this character of devotion and love, and he would be a perfect character. And in distinction, you have Bhima, who's very angry and very, very foolhardy and very confident in himself, but so confident in himself that he doesn't see himself's limitations.
Sure.
You ever know someone who doesn't know enough about something that they know that they're wrong?
Oh, like everybody.
That's Bhima.
Including me. We all do that.
Because he doesn't have the conflict where it comes to the duty. So this is where
it comes to the duty.
This is where the translation of dharma comes complicated, because it really doesn't mean duty. It's just a way. Your dharma is not duty. Your dharma is how do you best and most economically and most efficiently with your karma as currency. How do you efficiently engage in the reality? That's what dharma is. So your dharma is different from mine, even if we're observing nonviolence. So you could look at it and say, I did not do a lie. I killed Bhima, your character Bhima. Bhima can say, I killed an elephant.
Yeah.
I didn't kill Ashwatthama, so don't tell him that, but just tell him I killed Ashwatthama.
Yeah.
And Arjun says, but that's equivocation. You're trying to trick him. That's a lie. So for Arjun, his moral compass says, well, what's the outcome? Your moral compass says, well, what's on me? We have a quadrant in behavioral health of grandiosity and everyone is all over this thing, right?
Sure.
Right. So you have all these different elements of your mind and elements of your moral compass. And the beautiful thing about this is you have characters that represent different things, and our tale is no shortage of that. But Bhima there tries to run and he tries to fight Pashupatastra. There's a scene there Krishna has to stop you because you would die.
because that's a power. That's a magical weapon.
That's Shiva's magical weapon, the destroyer weapon. That's like that's the god of destroyer, the god of destruction's weapon. So it's not something you.
It's like trying to take a swing at a nuclear weapon or something.
Yeah, so it's like
that's exploded. So it's explode. I'm going to hit the nuclear weapon with my club or something.
But to your story about glory, this concept of like honor and glory.
Yeah,
he
was all about that.
All about that.
Yeah.
You will live, and this is one of the beautiful things about that is, again, his story's been embellished. Duryodhana, his feud with Duryodhana, Bhima was as a child just a very loving guy. Everyone loved him. He was peaceful. He would rub his back on trees. Like he would run like the wind. He was just a happy, happy boy.
Yeah.
They lived in the woods. Then after Pandu died, Kunti had these kids. Madhuri threw them. So now she's got 3 sons and 2 stepsons she's got to take care of. So she goes back to the kingdom and says, well, these are Kuru dynasty kids. They can't be living in the woods. So we're going to live in the kingdom. So as children, now the feud starts.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're asking the question, well, now we're going to have to foresee in 18 years when these 2, Duryodhana and Yudhishthira, are grown, we're going to have to figure out who's better to be king. Because Bharata set this example of you have to have a merit system also. Not just by birth, you have to have a meritocracy. So that feud started.
That's what they said.
Now in that, you have the strong, muscular mace wielder Duryodhana, and then the strong, muscular waist leader Bhima that have a rivalry.
I'm Bhima.
You're Bhima, yeah. The Pandava guy and the Kaurava guy, they have a rivalry.
Yeah.
And again, I told you this is about like the adults manipulating, because Gandhar Naresh Shukuni, the King Shukuni, felt angry that, man, you married my sister to this blind guy, and she put this you slighted Gandhar. He moved to Hastinapur. He left his kingdom with his son, and he lived in modern day India, right? And he told his nephew Duryodhana, when they were little boys, this guy Bhima likes to eat, so befriend him, give him this rice pudding, and we're going to poison it. Yeah. And when he's passed out, throw him in the river.
Yeah, I actually just listened to that.
Yeah, so they tried to kill him.
Part of the story, yeah.
Right, and then he goes down, and then who does he find?
He like fights something at the bottom of the river or something like that.
He doesn't fight it. He goes down there, and he fights these 2 little guards, like these guards of the sea, and then they're like, who is this kid that came here?
Yeah.
And the king of the serpents, Nagraj, comes, flows out in the river, and he examines the boy and says, who are you? You're not like, something's different. He said, I'm Kunti's son of the wind, and I am Pandu. Kunti? I am Kunti's grand-grand-grand-uncle.
Yes, okay.
And so he says, come to my court. He gives him an elixir. And the elixir has the strength of 100 men. Like, when did this story get written? It's so beautiful, but the strength of 100 elephants, not even 100 men.
Yeah.
So now you come back to the surface.
It's pretty strong.
You realize that someone tried to assassinate you.
Yeah.
You realize that you go back to the kingdom, everyone's crying because you've been gone for like a week.
Yeah.
And you're like, this little kid befriended me, and he tried to kill me. He's going to kill my family next.
Yeah. So he starts becoming suspicious of everybody.
He's just damn right. And after that moment, there's a mission of like, I don't like this guy. This guy tried to kill me. And Bhima's got now, after that moment, Duryodhana knows that, I messed up. I didn't kill him. And now this dude's 100 elephants strong. Like, so what do I do?
So he's even stronger.
Yeah, and then that's only before Draupadi came. There's so many different. There's an assassination attempt on.
Yeah, there's all kinds.
There's all kinds of like.
It's a long story,
and they hate it, and it's constantly like, over here you have people that are.
That's why I like saying it's Draupadi as the cause. It's more complicated.
It's much more complicated.
Because it's always happening. But she was probably like part of the final, not her as her actions, but her that situation was probably a catalyst for the specific war that happened.
Yeah.
But there was obviously the enmity that was enmeshed for their whole lives.
Yeah.
Of the Kauravas and the Pandavas. What I would think would be fun at some point. It was just occurring to me. Like I remember there was I can't remember his name. There's a professor who literature that I liked, and he had this idea that that as an assignment people should create characters and have them converse or meet each other basically. And I would think it'd be really interesting to have like Achilles and Arjuna have a conversation about something, right? Like
the real ones,
like, well, I just mean like two actors, obviously, but like as an assignment, just like as an assignment, like it'd be interesting, like a podcast or like just writing out something of like, what would they talk about? Like, what would they be interested in? What would they, and how would they be different? And,
they probably try to fight each other.
Maybe. I mean, that's what's interesting. And it would be same thing with like, what would, like, if you got like, Medea, Antigone, Draupadi in around dinner, and they were just having conversations about men, and they were just talking about men, it would be so interesting. And it'd be like, what is this, or add Helen in there. It's like, what would they all say?
That'd be hilarious.
Yeah. It'd be, that'd be a fun little thing. But anyway, so, we talked Arjuna, we talked about Bhima, Bhishma. And maybe we can end with this because, there's a lot to talk about. You could always come back on.
But so go ahead. I was going to say that one thing that's kind of cool is like there's a relationship between Bhima and Arjuna. That there's an interesting relationship there.
How do you interpret that? Because I'm interpreting it one way. But
well, they're both considered middle brothers. Bhima is really considered like the middle brother. They call his nickname is modulated by middle brother. But he, again, into this like single-mindedness, part of Bhima's nobility and part of this single-mindedness is just acceptance and acceptance of what he has to do. So like there was just by existence, just by example, he's Arjuna's favorite brother is Bhima. Everyone's favorite is Nakula, the youngest, but Arjuna really loves Bhima.
Yeah.
Arjuna will look, because you guys are both warriors. You're the one that conquered everything. You're the one that like collected the kingdom.
Yeah.
And Yudhishthira was ruling it because you serve your brother.
Sure.
You don't have a dad. But like when you were little kids, like this, one of Arjun's 10 names is the one who conquered sleep. That idea came from Bhima. Bhima never got enough to eat because he's so well loved. Drona's wife would make little extra food, and he would wake up at night, all in the dark. He would make the food, eat the food, and one day Arjun catches him. What are you doing? You're making all this food, eating it? And he's like, yes, because I don't get enough to eat. Well, how are you able to do this? He says, it's practice. Abhyasa, he says, it's practice. All your body can be seeing. Even, he says you can see with all parts of your body, your hands, your mind, everything. You have to practice that. And since that day forward, Arjun takes that as like, the moral decision that Bhima had to come through was, we have little food, we're living here. Should I stay up and eat extra food at night? And he comes to the conclusion, I don't get enough food, I'm going to do it. Well, how am I going to do it? As a warrior, as a child warrior, he says, well, I'm going to practice doing this at night, so there's no trace, like a ninja. No one even knows that I was there eating. Everything's clean and it's silent. I mean, he's like,
I know eating is a big, yeah.
And Arjun watches this. Now he's not doing it because he needs to be an expert thief. He's just doing it because that's what his dharma is. He relates it to his hunger by, I'm a warrior. If I'm hungry, how do I fix it? I know I'll get in trouble. His quandary is not, should I eat the food that is going to be for tomorrow? His quandary is, I want to eat it. I don't want to get caught.
Yeah.
I made that decision. I'm at peace with it. I'm going to go do it and do it really well. And he just can do it. Arjuna sees that.
Yeah.
And he loves his brother so much that he's like, well, what's best in this? What's best in this? He has practiced so much that he can see without seeing. I have to go do that as a archer. I'm not going to sleep. I'm just going to. So you see, like there's this constant.
Yeah. So he's like learning from, or like admiring Bhima in some characteristic, and so he wants to go out and get that characteristic for himself. Like emulate it or something.
Emulate, but then there's also stark moments of like distinction. Bhima is okay. Sure. Bhima is okay saying we can equivocate.
Yeah.
And because
he just wants to get the job done, essentially. Yeah.
Arjun is the one that's like, I want the name. If you let me do it my way, I can kill Drona. You don't have to lie.
Yeah, don't take my name.
Yeah, and trust me, guys. You know that I'm like anointed by God. I have the God weapons. You let me go do that. And so there's that quandary with him. Like that's when he's frozen with Karna, he has this like nobility moment.
That's why I think like in terms of the embodiment of certain deep values from what I know of the Mahabharata so far, Bhima seems like the more perfect character, not just in the sense of he's not conflicted that much about stuff. Like he just does. And it's Arjuna. Now Arjuna's the more interesting one from a literary standpoint because he has conflict and drama and because he's trying to think like I shouldn't kill my cousins and why should I do that? And and that's what the Bhagavad Gita is. So that's why I was.
But I wouldn't say he's morally perfect though, because he does perfect. Like in our story too. I'm not saying morally perfect. In our story, what happens when Gandhari asks him? When Gandhari asks him, how could you eat my guts? What does he say?
Yeah, he lies. Yeah, and I could not.
Yeah, I could not. Like he's not perfect in the sense that he's.
No, I don't mean perfect in the sense of he does nothing wrong from out like certain perspectives on him. You could have perspectives on him, obviously. I mean, if you're a pacifist, you would think that he was obviously wrong because he's going out killing lots of people. But I mean, it seems he's like
conflicted in telling him.
Yeah, about what he like his actions are forward moving, trying to come up, and he's
like a joke.
Like that's his Dharma or whatever. Like the concept, I'm still needing to learn more about the concept. But that's Arjuna is always the one trying to evolve into a different way. And that makes him a more interesting literary character, but he's not a fully fleshed out ideal. Like, you know what I'm saying? So there's like Jesus before he goes out on the, 33 when he goes away for a couple of years or whatever and comes back, but he's a perfectly idealized hero when he comes back.
That's an excellent point, Kirk.
Yeah.
See, this is why it's been so great to work with you on this. First of all, you're phenomenally knowledgeable and just phenomenal person. But that's an interesting perspective. So who would you in the literary canon, the Western literary canon, compare Bhima to? Is that more of a Hercules?
Oh, that's Hercules. That's what I'm saying. So Hercules has the same kind of thing where he is that kind of a character. So Hercules is interesting.
But doesn't he lament that he has moments of doubt?
Well, it depends who's telling the story.
Okay.
But he doesn't like in most stories. I don't think of him as having much doubt in the sense of his actions. He just takes action, makes it happen. But what's interesting from a cultural standpoint from him, and I don't know about Arjuna, and that's what I'd like to know more about at some point, is Hercules is the Pan-Hellenic hero, even more than Achilles. And he is the all Greek, like every Greek city had like stories about Hercules that were, about the strongest man. He did all these things. He like tricked Atlas and things like that to go get him something or some golden fleece or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so there's all these stories about Hercules doing that. I don't know of too many about his inner conflict. I mean, there's the one I told you about with Seneca, but that's a later Roman Stoic in the AD, just telling about like, how do you destroy, it's a kind of a question like, how do you kill Superman? Right. And they have we have a killing of Superman, Superman versus, which is him. He chooses sacrifice in a sense. Right. But in this case, in the Stoics philosophy, it's through his own machinations, right? Like that's the only way you can harm yourself as a Stoic in a sense, is that the world can't really do anything to you as a Stoic kind of belief in the sense of, you just react, like it's about your reactions. So I can like they have I can like fart in this room and you could be all pissed off about it, or you could just be, like that. That's literally Marcus Aurelius writes about that. Like somebody farting in the meditations, like someone actually just farts in your presence. And like, what do you do about it?
What do you do?
Yeah. You could like banish them. You could hate them. You could be mad at them. But that really just does more to you than to them. And so, you should just like let it go. And so the idea is that as you do that more and more, what's the only thing that can destroy you? And I think the Stoic refrain, its moral, its lesson is that the only thing that can hurt you is yourself in a sense.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what so
I guess anyway, in that way, Bhima only has
Seneca.
anger.
But that's Seneca's version. Yeah. So Bhima has
the anger.
hunger.
Anger.
Isn't it hunger? Because doesn't he like eat himself to death? Isn't that one version?
One version is like they say that's how he succumbs to eating too much.
Yeah, so it's like.
But that would be like the sin. But his I guess defect in character as it plays out in the story.
Sure.
Would be.
Does the anger? So here's the question then: does the anger? It's like there's the anger of Achilles, right, and that gets a lot of problems. Is there an anger of Bhima that causes problems for him, or for others, I guess, but for him in particular? You see what I'm saying? So like, is the anger like a righteous anger that's good? So the question to me in literature is always like, how does the culture view it?
Yeah.
So if the culture is like directing it as like, this is a righteous anger, he's loyal, he's dutiful, he has a dharma that brings order to the society because he's willing to jump into the nuclear weapon to save everybody if that's what it takes. So that's what the culture is kind of advocating for and putting all their values and saying that this is the that's what Jesus is. Jesus is the embodiment of all these ideals.
He has anger.
But it's like righteous anger.
He has anger and character flaws that demonstrate. He has lots of examples of righteous anger.
Sure.
All of his like violent acts of killing people, they're all violent acts. So all of his like labors would
good?
be. No, those are good.
Yeah,
but the character itself then has arrogance and anger that's displayed.
Okay, so arrogance I would imagine is not good.
And
Very
the anger
rarely is that good in a culture.
And the anger that he has oftentimes, like for example, that's one of the main encounters that he has with Hanuman. Is he gets angry and he runs out of the house, and he gets angry at everyone. Yeah, anger gets him in trouble, and he's running through the forest, and he encounters this ape sitting on the ground with this long tail. He comes up to the ape. He says, "Move your tail." And the ape said, "I'm eating a banana. Just walk over it." "I'm not going to walk over your tail, you stupid ape." "Move your tail. I'm telling you, I'm the son of Beam. I'm son of the wind. Move your tail." "Oh, you move the tail." And so Beam tries to pick it up. Can't do it. And this guy's just eating the banana, sitting there. He can't move the tail. And he says, "Wow, you must be something sacred. I don't know who you are, but you must be something sacred because I can't beat you." And he shows himself, "I'm Hanuman. You have such an ego. You have such an anger problem. You were about ready to beat me up. You had no idea who I was."
Yeah.
Again, all of us go and we drink from the water.
Is this in the Mahabharata tales?
It's in the Mahabharata. No, that story of Hanuman's not in the Mahabharata tales, but the story of drinking in the water.
Yes.
The voice tells us don't drink the water, and we say, "We're going to drink. What are you going to do?" And then we die.
They didn't have a choice in that, in a sense, like they were being forced to drink.
The story is that it's in
that's
defiance.
how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah, but there's a story of like the story is that the voice warns them.
Yes.
And there's a lot of like.
But I thought there was like a power in forcing them to drink against their will.
They're getting thirsty around it.
But is the thirst natural? Is what I'm saying. Like is it they just been walking around and they're.
The story is not like it's like some mind control that they have to drink. They just feel thirsty and they want to drink. And then the voice says, "This is my water. You can't drink from it." And they say, "Well, I'm going to drink from it." Bhima, in fact, says the voice, "I'm going to drink. What are you going to do?"
Really? Okay.
And drinks the water. "Stop. What are you going to do?"
So I've been interpreting that way differently.
But our story is open to, that's what the beautiful thing about what we're doing is that we're bringing our own interpretations to it.
Yeah.
And again, we're doing exactly what we were talking about, bringing a flavor to it. Now, if you've never seen the Mahabharata, you've never heard of the Gita, this is going to be your starting point.
Yeah.
And it's our version of it. Yeah. So there is a Gita in it because it's an essential part of it, but we've interpreted it. That's Anne's and Shrini's interpretation, and that their interpretation is based off of Peter Brooks. Peter Brooks was based off of. So
sure,
it's an interesting
because when I saw the Peter Brook version, of that scene of the drinking water, it felt like the voice, like it felt like they were like there was a God character, pushing them down to drink. I don't know why. That's the impression I got. And maybe that was just me interpreting it in a weird way.
And but
I think
God
it makes
is
sense
Yama.
they're more like defiant. It's more their defiance is what's relevant in that instance.
But defiance of what? Their defiance is born of, because it's born of like their arrogance. That's what they're trying to show them.
That's what they're showing.
Like Arjuna does the same thing. Arjuna says,
And this is where Yudhishthira actually prevails.
Because he
has enough wisdom.
And again,
yeah,
he's the son of Yama. He's again he's a half human, half god. And his god is Yama, the god of Dharma. So the god Yudhishthira is innately a person who thinks about, how do I relate to the world virtuously? And what is virtue? And how do you relate to it with virtue? And that's why he's able to answer all these questions. And it's interesting, one of the questions he does talk about the equivocating of lie and truth, which is why later on he ultimately equivocates on lie and truth with Drona.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff that he's able to prove his nobility through understanding of Dharma and application of Dharma. In fact, one of his names is he who does. In fact, we have a line that Vyasa at the end says, "You are the purest."
Yes.
His name was Dharamraj Yudhishthira. He who has virtuous engagement in the world.
Because he technically doesn't lie in a sense. Right?
He has all the virtues. He's not too arrogant.
He has all the virtues.
He's very flawed. It isn't that he has all the virtues. It's that he's concerned with all the virtues.
Yeah.
Bhima doesn't have certain concerns. Arjun doesn't have certain concerns. Arjuna has certain, and the same with Achilles, has certain grandiosity. Mm-hmm. And that is what makes them heroic, is that they're willing to charge into, like, they're willing to do this, like, these insane things, you know? Yeah. But part of them is that Arjuna leaves and says, for the next 12 years, I'm going to wage war against the gods to get the weapons. And
yeah, he says that. He doesn't say that exact line, but that's in this play.
Yeah, and he doesn't say he's going to.
That's
wage
what he's
war.
going off to.
He's going to accumulate them.
Yeah.
Who has the audacity? I mean, that's the character. That's again, that's a beautiful literary device to make someone that heroic.
Yeah.
And how do you make them that heroic? They have to be part god.
Yeah.
How can you explain this level of, like, whatever?
Well, we should probably start wrapping up.
Okay.
But we could always come back and have more conversations.
I'd love
to.
Yeah.
But it's and to me it's such an interesting, like, world, like, because to me it's like opening up a whole world that I didn't know anything about, or very little about. Mm-hmm. That's always, to me, what is so great about art and literature.
Yeah.
Is, it'd be nice to travel to India one day, but even if you travel to India, like, you're gonna get you'll get a sense of the culture. You'll meet people. You'll see how they act, how they interact, how they talk, how fast they walk, how slow they walk, who's walking where, doing what, how do they communicate to you, all kinds of really important things. But I think you can never understand it if you don't read Mahabharata, right? If you don't experience it on some level, you'll never, like, you need this. You in a sense I'm traveling to India by reading and exploring this now. I still want to travel there one day. That'd be great. But that you get such a sense. It's the same thing with, like, Greece or Italy or 15th century Venice or something like that.
Yeah.
And so you could do that through literature and art. That's what I love about art. Is it's like there's a line from John Keats, the poet. He says, "Travel through the realms of gold," and like the realms of imagination. Mm-hmm. Like that to me is such a fascinating thing, and what I hope more people who listen to the show will do more of that, of travel to these different worlds, especially worlds that are different than yours once in a while. Like, you don't have to spend your life studying Mahabharata tales. I mean, we live in a robust world where you can listen to podcasts like this, you can watch TV shows, you could read a little bit of the Bhagavad Gita, and that's enough. And then you can explore it again at some other point or something. You don't have to become an expert to really enjoy it. I think that, I'll end by saying, I think one of the things I'm discovering, something I've always known, and the English romantics talked about this, about the West. And this happens in the West where there's a scholastics, there's this classical movement, and then there's like a reaction against it. Yeah. Where, and in the West, we really have this I would call it like PhD-itis today. Like where I really respect people who get PhDs, but we think of that as the equivalent of wisdom. And one thing I'm learning about Mahabharata in India and other stories that I've been hearing about, I'm just barely learning about, is it seems like, and you can say what you want here and finish or whatever, but it seems like in India, the idea of wisdom is more storytelling based. Like, can you tell good stories? Is there, and that's how you convey wisdom. That's how people are, get wisdom, as they have lots of stories to tell. The wise man is the man with lots of stories. Whereas today in the West, the wise man's the guy with the right, letters at the end of his name. Even though there's been lots of studies of like Nobel laureates that are brilliant in some very, esoteric thing, and they are morons in everything else.
Yeah.
And there's literal, like, I don't remember
very
the term.
deep and not very broad. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like such an interest, like the Wordsworth put it, is we murder to dissect. And there's an interesting thing. Now, again, I do not want to denigrate experts or PhDs. I have a lot of respect to being an expert in some field, but I think it's an interesting, because the point of that should be wisdom, the spread of wisdom, the adulation and rising of the wisdom. And we don't, I think in the West, we might forget that if we don't remember that wisdom is so heavily embodied in great stories. And I think India, like I said, my experience with India so far has been they have a reverence for that, the story.
Yeah.
So
it's a huge population, like it's a, and like I said, there's India and it's people that are very, very into the stories. Like they're very, very, very good storytellers. Everything becomes a story, and histories are that way. And a lot of that has to do with massive population, and access to education and things like that. And again, like, what that culture and what those philosophies do is allow for like real-time interpretation. Like I'm learning, again, I can't thank you enough for like these, and all the actors that were in it that are not from Indian background, that allowing us to have like completely new interpretations of it.
Yeah.
Like, how is it applied to like this modern time? And with that, there's facets for everyone. Meet everyone where they're at, And so there are stories that people are going to take, like every other culture, very, 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 like, seriously and true. There was a guy named Bhima who was able to open a guy's chest and things like that.
Truth.
The literal truth of it. And I'm sure there's other people who are going to just take it as beautiful, metaphors. And then there's still other people who are going to interpret those metaphors and change it. So I think that's one of the reasons why the Mahabharata is endures. And that's why all the epic poems endures, because you can
something universal
to say about that. And not just universal to say, but it's you're bringing more than just, so like when we've had modern adaptations of Shakespeare, right, where you do Shakespeare in modern clothing, or you do Coriolanus set in like a East European,
Clueless.
So
or Mean Girls.
Yeah, or Mean Girls, or any of these, like, but see, Clueless or Mean Girls are like complete. I'm talking like repackaging.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Like, you have the story, you have like Patrick Stewart doing,
or like you guys did Romeo and Juliet last year with Austin Shakes, and that was in modern clothing, in modern time, or like what was it, like the 20 or 50s, something like that.
Yeah, it was.
Y'all were in suits and stuff. There you go, Peaky Blinders type thing, right?
They but put what we're doing, a three-piece suit in the summer outside.
Yeah. But what we're doing here is this is like a slightly different thing, is because like what Peter Brook did and what Anne's doing and what we're involved in is, in particular the Peter Brook thing and ours, is that you're bringing all these different cultures. So our interpretation of Peter Brook's interpretation of Drona was portrayed by a Japanese actor who portrayed it as a samurai.
He did it internationally with this cast. That was really interesting.
And that's so cool, is that now you have anyone who sees that is going to walk away with maybe some of the morals and some of like the principles are going to be in it, but you have like a very different understanding and different approach. Yeah. So that's one of the things that I think the West offers quite a bit of opportunity there for a lot of these stories, because again, we grow up with these stories, like Abhinav, we grow up with them, and we know we have one fixed way of interpreting it. Well, even having the conversation with our ancestors of like, Like conversation with my dad of being like, Vyasa is multiple people, or conversation like, with people in his generation. He's the one that taught me that. But like people in my generation, his generation, there's a lot of them on different levels that this is the gospel thing. And to understand that, well, it's an oral history, and that,
it changes over time.
It changes over time, right? You might have a chapter, but how do we know that chapter of Bhagavad Gita was interpreted the same way? Or how do we know that what we have recorded is not like, well, we have 4 lines. We do that in our script all the time. Bhima has 4 lines essentially saying the same thing. Let's compress it to 1.
Yeah.
And that's the one that endures in that version.
Yeah.
So that's appealing to the Arjuna. That's appealing to the ones that are like finding how they relate dharmically to the world. And then if you're like Bhima, who engages it in a different way, Dharma has a different view for you. So that's, I think, one of the very cool things about how folks interpret these stories. And now you have like interpretations from the perspective of Draupadi. The whole story told from Draupadi's perspective. Now the players are the same, but this is why I think it's beautiful that we're having much more. And again, that perspective shift gets into all the philosophical debate that have these books and books and books written about, well, Gandhari says one line, whether the man and woman when they're married are one, so who cares if one was lost before the other? If one's lost, they're both lost. Well, schools of philosophy are written about, is that true? What is marriage? What are relationships? We're living in those modern times of reconsidering that, And this story has things like the transgender characters, like Shikandi. So there's all these different, it's ample, it's such fertile ground for so many different perspectives.
Yes.
Like Kurt Russell did a movie called Soldier. You remember that?
Soldier?
Yeah. Or like if you think of like Terminator, or like any of these movies where you have, or these stories that have like this unyielding force of a character.
Yeah.
Which is Bhima. What if we told the entire Mahabharata from Bhima's perspective? And how he's looking at like Arjuna here is worried about Karna. Karna did X, Y, and Z. He should have died. Like, what is the perspective? Like, we know it from Krishna's perspective or Bhishma's perspective. But this is fertile ground to tell all of those interesting stories.
Yes.
Not just repackage it.
Yeah.
Sometimes the repackaging, you butt up against a lot of traditions and there's a lot of socio-political and financial things mixed up in this, where there are temples that have like, they feel like this is how we're supposed to represent Krishna. This is how we're supposed to, just like in Egypt, they have museums where we're only going to tell you this history. We will endorse this history.
Yeah. Now you're out opening up a whole
different kind of words.
We're going to talk for another 2 hours.
Yeah,
if we get into
so
that.
like, that's the.
But
I think
know
that's
what you're
one of
talking
the
about, like
interesting things is
reinterpreting in certain ways
to
get across an ideology that's popular, you're interested in.
Yeah, like what are the things, and that's happening. Like one of the current cultural trends in India is, like most places, is to go much more conservative. And so you have like a populist movement that is adopting more conservative. And so they are interpreting.
Which I think that's correct what you're saying. It's across the whole world.
Across the world.
Right now that's happening.
But in India, in the context of this story, you have like a modern interpretations of these characters in certain ways.
Yeah.
So like it's very relevant. And so
there's so much of that. And at least, it depends on the era in terms of how realistic they're going to be, how abstract, there's so much you could look at. And that's why I'm, saying it's really interesting to study these things.
Yeah.
Because you learn so much about that era.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's one of the missing ingredients of education is that we teach education as like a series of facts on a, Wikipedia facts, but we don't embody them in the stories that were popular and why they were popular at the time. And I think integrate, like my vision of a great education K through 12 is like for the humanities is like an integrated history, literature, art program where there's not really, you could study them slightly separately, but it's really one thing. You're basically studying, the literature of the 15th century, the history of the 15th century, and the paintings and art, so that you could actually understand the 15th century.
Yeah.
Right. Or the 12th or the 11th, century, when England is invaded by what we call France. Right.
Yeah.
So that like, to understand that, you need to know the literature. You can't just understand a couple kings and hear a couple stories about wars and things like that. You need to have all of that. So yeah, and I think that's what you're kind of saying, in the sense of how it's different throughout ages, and that's super important to the story.
Yeah, and currently, and that it's like it's utilized. I mean, ultimately, these are stories, and it's what we're doing that's cool is we're engaging with the story and trying to bring it to life, which is a different experience than being taught it and imagining it as a story. Being Arjuna and reading about Arjuna are very different things also. So
that's another thing. Yeah.
That's a whole
Something
different
with like
thing.
reading Shakespeare or should you watch it?
Yeah. So it's
you have to explore it the way you want to.
Yeah.
But I do hope that people will, again, if you're seeing this before the 14th of 2025, come see Arjuna, Bhima, Nakula, Draupadi, Duryodhana, Bhishma, Pandava, and all the characters of the Mahabharata, and of course Krishna and
Yudhishthir, and there's a bunch of other characters. Yeah.
Lots of characters. So come learn more about it. Hopefully you found this interesting, of like the deeper meaning and philosophical, which, just the robustness of this story that very few people in the West have ever encountered, really. And it's just such a robust story. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me, man. Thanks for doing this. And
it's been fun.
It's been great.
I learned a lot. I appreciate it.
Likewise.